Good morning, everyone. Welcome to session 2, the energy sector. If you are visiting for the first time today, you've missed a great panel discussion earlier. Jack, who was leading that, introduced it as the highlight of the day. I'm not entirely convinced. I think this might be one of the highlights of the day. So welcome. This is the Financing Innovative Energy Projects for Basic Service Delivery. Sorry, that was a panel discussion. This is a municipal subsidy for solar. All systems go. Damien, I really like the title. I'm pleased to introduce you to everyone as well. Damien is the director of the Sustainability Innovation Lab, which implements the ISHAC project. He's got a great bio, and if you're interested, please do navigate to his profile to read more. But Damien, I'm going to hand over to you. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Great, thank you, Nick. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to tell you about the ISHAC project and the work that we've done over the years to try and develop and demonstrate a model for free basic electricity via off-grid solar home systems. The title, Municipal Subsidy for Solar, All Systems Go, was actually generously given to me by Reshmi, I think. And yes, to some extent, what I'm going to talk to you about today is exactly that. It's not entirely the case, though, that it's all systems go in terms of the take-up of this kind of model nationally, given South Africa's particular context. And I'll go into some of the reasons for that. But first off, the idea is that residents in informal settlements who don't yet have the grid and are waiting for 2, 3, 4 more years for the grid can access entry-level basic energy services for free. And that the model that we have, for example, establishes a kind of a platform for incremental service delivery and for building a kind of building readiness in the community for more substantial services down the line. In our case, our main project is in Stellenbosch, and we use solar home systems, which are small, standalone 50-watt units that generate electricity from the sun and sufficient power stored in a battery for lighting and media. Clients that join the service join it voluntarily, and they pay a small joining fee. And then they have a free basic service. They will make co-payments for additional needs from time to time, but there's no fixed monthly fee in the main project that we run in Stellenbosch. This is a picture of some of those households in Stellenbosch, and you can see the panels are small, very well suited to this kind of terrain, which is quite difficult to access, particularly for more conventional services. The big thing that we go on and on about is that one needs to run this kind of thing as a utility, so you can't just drop and go. You need to establish local capacity and systems to then maintain that as a utility so that you get a high level of service throughout the lifespan of that particular entry-level service. And that costs money. So we were able to launch this project thanks to initial seed funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and then a large chunk of money from the Green Fund via the DBSA. And then we worked with Stellenbosch Municipality for a number of years to figure out how to make this financially sustainable. So we had the capital for the infrastructure, but we needed to secure annuity revenue to keep the thing going at a high level of standard. And what the municipality did was that they altered their indigent policy, which is a policy that all municipalities should have to deal with how free basic services would be provided to the poorest households within that municipality. And it was really rather a simple change. Basically, residents in informal settlements were firstly deemed to be indigent, so there was no additional hurdle. And in order to get their free basic electricity, if they were on the grid, they would get 100 free units a month. And if they were not on the grid, then the rand value of those 100 units could go towards the maintenance of an off-grid solar service via a private energy service company. And that is how and then they went onto an open tender, and we bid for delivering that service. Obviously, we had the benefit of the grant for the infrastructure, and all we got from the municipality then was it's currently 115 Rand a month per household that joins. And it's been largely a success. So we have about 1,700 households now that use the service. We're actually transitioning towards grid electrification in some areas of that community, which is, I think, very much part of the long-term story. And then there have been other aspects to the model that we've developed and tested over the time around job creation and skills development, and the idea about entrenching or establishing capacity locally to maintain the service and provide a high level of sort of client service. There's an entrepreneurship skills development element to that as well. These are our sites. We focus on just the Western Cape. As I said, our main site is in Stellenbosch. We've got another small site in Stellenbosch as well, which is funded by another non-profit organization. Over the last year, we've been very fortunate to work with GreenCape and the Airports Company of South Africa for sites 4 and 5 on this map, which is on land owned by the airport. And that's been a really interesting project in it's funded in a different way. So it's just upfront funding rather than an ongoing subsidy for the maintenance. And so that's where co-payments come in from the community members that join it. But the great learning in those projects has been the value of really deep engagement with the communities and the community leaders. I mean, that's not just for buy-in, that's also for running a really efficient operation, so that you efficiently disseminate information, you get deep understanding, and you get horizontal learning around how it all works. So that's been great. And then we've got another project in Cape Town in Philippi, in a community called Sikalo, and they don't have any subsidy. So there we've got about 150 households that are just paying off the cost of a solar home system, and for most of them a TV as well. And the idea there for us, then that community approached us, but the idea for us was to give that community a chance to see this technology and to decide whether this is something that might want to contest for as an entry-level sort of free basic service. And in fact, that is what they did more than 2 years ago now. They petitioned the city of Cape Town for a repurposing of the free basic entitlement in the form of a solar home system, and that's still ongoing. And so to that question of all systems go, I would have to say that certainly nationally and even here in the Western Cape, the adoption of these kinds of models, and we're certainly not the only ones trying to develop models for alternative energy services, has been limited. And I wanted to spend some time talking about why that might be. Is it because the impact and the benefits are not meaningful enough? I've given quite a lot of these talks over the years, and I have to say I really don't think this is the problem. I think there's very little doubt that the impacts for the household around even this small service, being able to access clean, safe, convenient lighting, whereas normally you'd be using paraffin or candles, affordably, and being able to reduce some of your risks that you're exposed to when you live in an informal settlement around health, around shack fires, that kind of thing. The positive contribution it makes to the quality of your domestic life, having access to media, being able to charge your cell phone. The opportunities and models such as ours, where there is some job creation and skills development, the opportunity to start engaging these communities at last in the systems of state, allowing them to see that there is some progress. I think there's plenty of benefit, and I don't think the reason why there hasn't been much take-up of these models is because of doubts about impact and benefit. So is it because of policy blockages? Is the policy not in place? Well, even in the panel earlier, there was mention of some of the policies that are actually enabling, that exist to enable alternative technologies to be used for free basic provision. There's two policies. There's the free basic electricity policy and the free basic alternative energy policy. There's some confusion, it seems, around which one is the one under which you would provide a solar home system. Under FBE, E stands for electricity, and under FBAE, the AE stands for alternative energy. So under electricity, it can be provided either on-grid or off-grid, and off-grid would be via solar home systems. The alternative energy types, the policy actually talks about energy carriers, and what was intended there was alternative fuels such as paraffin, LPG, coal, bioethanol. It actually explicitly says FBA can be applied in areas where there are no solar home systems planned. But from our point of view, it's neither here nor there. The point is these policies are in place, and the intention is that households that are entitled to free basic services can access alternative technologies as well. The problems that do exist with these two policies is that they're incredibly old. If you read them, they look like draft documents, and then they haven't kept up with technology or with the realities in South Africa. So in 2003, great progress had been made in electrifying urban areas. And so the expectation was that all urban areas would be electrified via the grid, and that therefore these alternatives would really rather be for rural areas. And that's in the subsequent years not been the case. And so off-grid solutions do now have to be considered for urban areas. The other bigger problem I feel with these policies is that they're exclusive. It's either FBE or FBA, but the basic energy services as defined in South Africa's policy is actually for lighting, media, and cooking. So I would say that these two policies should be looked at again, and they should be complementary for those households that don't have access to the grid. So yeah, I don't think policy is the problem, even though there's lots of room for improvement. And policy is trumped by the law. So what does the law say in South Africa? Well, the Constitution actually says nothing about energy, and some people use that to say that, well, there isn't a right to energy. But the Constitutional Court actually clarified in 2010 in the case of Joseph versus the city of Joburg, that electricity is an important basic municipal service, and that local government has a constitutional and statutory obligation to provide it. Prior to that, the Municipal Systems Act, which is kind of like the job description of the municipality, that's the Act of 2000, states that all members of the local community should have access to at least the minimum level of basic services, and that poor households should be subsidized. And importantly, that those subsidies don't necessarily need to come from the revenues generated from that service. So, for example, revenues from electricity sales. And I realize that that is a major challenge for all municipalities, but this is what the law says at the moment. Going further, the National Energy Act locates the responsibility at national government and says that the government must provide universal access to appropriate forms of energy, and importantly, taking into account the state's commitment to provide free basic electricity to poor households. Supporting those laws is the National Framework for Municipal Indigent Policies, which is a kind of a guideline document that helps municipalities to write their indigent policies. And they're two important, it's a very progressive document. There are two important parts that are relevant to this talk. The first is that it describes what a basic energy service is. As I said earlier, it's lighting, media, and cooking. But it also recognizes the role of incrementalism. And so it gives municipalities a pathway to incrementally provide the full package. And that's why things like solar home systems or gas services or other forms of alternative energy can be used in a stepwise fashion to achieve the sort of constitutional idea of progressive realization of services. So I don't think it's the law, and I don't think it's policy that's the problem, and I don't think it's questions about whether there's value in these kind of alternatives, but there is a question around costs. And obviously one can't compare the cost of grid electricity to the cost of solar home systems because you're not comparing apples with apples. But the city of Cape Town, for example, by its own account, has over 33,000 households that don't yet have grid electricity, and yet it has a policy of full electrification. So what would the cost to the city be when it achieves that full grid electrification? The city has reported numbers for grid maintenance alone per household of upwards of 500 Rand per month. So to maintain the grid, that's what it's costing the municipality per household. That excludes the cost or the cost of capital of infrastructure. It excludes the cost of free basic units, which is probably around 100 Rand a month. And it also excludes the cost of subsidizing the lifeline tariff, the lower block tariff for low income households. By comparison, a community of say 1,000 households using solar home systems say, over a 3-year period, well, a private operator could run that at least on a break even, if not profit basis, covering the cost of infrastructure and operations and maintenance for approximately 200 Rand a month. That's based on our experience. One could add a gas service to that and still be well below the 500 Rand a month mark. And the municipality, if it did that, would actually be meeting its statutory obligations to provide free basic services. So I feel that, yeah, cost is a problem. The fiscus is tight. Municipalities are really struggling with revenue to cover the cost of free basic services, but we are sitting in a situation where, in fact, those households that are most in need of indigent support are actually excluded from it, whereas households higher up the rung in terms of income levels are getting that support. As I said, I've given this kind of talk quite often over the years and strut all this stuff out, but what I always get at the end of these talks is the what about. And it's a what about a whole lot of things which are all very valid, particularly from local government's perspective. What about, is this going to solve the problem of illegal connections? What about municipalities' liabilities for taking on this entirely different modality? What about the risks of fire and theft? How's this going to solve our problem that we're experiencing around municipal revenues? And we don't have the capacity for this. It's completely new. Your technology doesn't do cooking, refrigeration. My own personal favorite, which was mentioned to me by someone at a high level of government, was, this might encourage land invasions, which again is a problem that municipalities are experiencing. But I think that the underlying problem that underpins these kinds of very valid objections or whatabouts is this expectation that there is any solution out there that is going to solve all those problems. It's certainly not solar home systems. All solar home systems can do is to make some contribution towards the municipality meeting its primary obligation, doing its job. at the lowest level. So if you think of energy provision as a ladder, which is not a new idea, then solar home systems would really be quite low down there. But you could see it as a valuable building block towards the eventual full grid electricity provision, should that be possible in the future, if those barriers that are always there, whether they're financial, legal, environmental, political, can be finally overcome. And so I think it's that perspective that I hope can be more broadly adopted when considering these kinds of alternatives. And then the whatabouts can be looked at in terms of, well, what can a solar home system or a gas service or a microgrid do to nudge some of these problems in the right direction? And I think, I don't have time to talk about that in any more detail, but in our experience, our work has helped to nudge some of these issues in the right direction and prepare communities for more substantial service delivery down the line. The only other thing I would say is that I recognize that it is difficult, while Stellenbosch might have done it, it is difficult for municipalities to necessarily replicate that model like it is. And I know that the city, for example, are looking at this, but I think it is certainly worthwhile looking at the idea of some kind of voucher, some kind of free basic energy or electricity voucher that a household could use and then select from a selection of vetted providers the kind of alternative energy they want to use, whether that's gas, solar home services, or whatever. I have no idea how long I've taken, but I'll leave it at that, and we can maybe open it up to the floor. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Damien. Really, really fascinating presentation. I have to commend you on two fronts. Firstly, just for navigating this virtual platform. It's quite intimidating speaking into sort of the abyss without much feedback. So I really appreciate that. Excellent presentation. And then secondly, just to commend you for the amazing work that you're involved with. Really, really inspiring. I've listened with great fascination. I'm not an energy expert, but a lot of what you described just makes so much intuitive sense. It's great to see these kinds of projects out there. There are a few questions in the chat that I'd like to just put to you, but I firstly want to mention to the viewers as well that there is a poll running. I should have mentioned it at the beginning. Hopefully you've seen it. If you haven't, there is of course still time to interact with it and encourage that. Damien, I'm gonna go straight to some of the questions if you don't mind. I think the first that I noticed or noted was someone asking, why have you moved away from a pay-as-you-go model?
Okay, when we started, so we were a spin-out from the Sustainability Institute, so we're a separate company, we're a social enterprise. And we were very ambitious. We said we're going to give this a punt, but with no prior experience other than academic research. And we were very lucky to raise funding from the Green Fund to then set up this model. And our mandate was to test, to develop, but to get to a point where we could show that we could run this at a large scale with some kind of subsidy. But of course, we hadn't yet gotten the subsidy from the municipality, and it took some years to figure that out. So to sustain it in the early days, we did have a monthly fee. And part of that monthly fee went towards paying off the cost of TVs and paying for TV licenses and that kind of thing. And but we were always gunning for the subsidy. And so by the time we got the subsidy, we were able to turn it into the final goal of this free basic modality. But we also did find that, as was mentioned in the panel, the pay-as-you-go model is really difficult to, it doesn't work. You can't, yeah, in any community, you will have households who can afford it and will keep up their payments, and that's great. But you're never going to be able to achieve universal access, where you've got these fixed monthly payments, where if the household doesn't pay, you switch them off, or you chase them up, or you do both. And so what we found that there was a gradual dropping off of payment compliance. And then we tested, so that was a fixed monthly payment. And then we tested a so-called sort of more pay-as-you-go, where you could switch on and off whenever you wanted to. But we were always very uncomfortable with the idea of switching off someone's household's basic energy service simply because they hadn't paid, especially in the South African context, where that is in fact a legal or a right, or an entitlement that's entrenched in law and policy. So that's kind of why, you know, we had experience with it. We don't think it's viable for universal access, but we were also able to kind of go the route of the free basic option. That said, we are big believers in co-payments. So we do embed co-payment events in our model at the point of joining. So it's a transactional, it's not a handout. You join, you pay to join, and therefore there's some value that you're expecting from it and that you give to that service. If you need some maintenance, a new light bulb, you need to replace your battery. If you want to buy a TV, then there's all these opportunities for parents to come in. And I think that's perhaps a more appropriate and scalable way to achieve universal access.
Brilliant, thank you. I think a great answer to the question. I guess on a similar theme, there's another question from the audience, which is asked, outside of funding, what do you see as some of your market's biggest challenges, and how can other stakeholders assist?
The challenges are immense. I mean, it's certainly difficult. What we would like to see is other players come into this market. I mean, we kind of have always, our purpose is to kind of learn some stuff and trailblaze, but we were hoping that by this stage there would be a much more demand for this, both at local government level and at community level, and that some of those questions around how do we make this work financially might have been solved by now, so that other players could come in, so that you could get innovation, competition, and scale. But at the same time, we certainly know that it's difficult to make this work because there's a lot of groundwork you need to do. You're working in really difficult environments. There are these risks around shack fires and threat and crime and that kind of thing. So the kinds of people who are prepared to work in those kind of environments are special people. I couldn't put my finger on a top 5 or even a top 3. But I guess the biggest challenge, which is I guess maybe what I focused on in the talk, is that we need to find. We need to find the funding for this. I think I'm hesitant to say this because I'm not in the seats of people in local government, and I'm completely naive to those many challenges, but I'd love to see some municipalities taking a punt on this, even on a pilot basis, so that learning can happen, the capacity building can happen. But I think there is some inertia and there's some fear of this, of taking the plunge into something that really is quite radically different from the norm.
Thanks, Damien. I think we're running out of time, but I'm going to quickly put one final question to you,
Sure.
which is something that I wanted to ask as well, which is beyond just electricity access, what are some of the other social economic impacts of your model?
Well, I mean, electricity itself has all sorts of enabling functions. I mean, the World Bank has reportedly identified Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which is universal access to clean, safe, affordable energy, as the #1 enabler of all the other, or most of the other SDG goals. But I mean, certainly from our little experience, we see some of those things I mentioned very quickly earlier on around just the quality of life. There's a little step up in the quality of life in that domestic setting. Opportunities for children to access information, opportunities for people to keep their cell phone charged so that if a job opportunity comes their way, they get the message, kind of thing, these little things. There are also these great opportunities for this kind of off-grid solutions to create a capacity locally and to and this is meaningful capacity. It's not just street sweeping, that kind of thing. It's technical skills development. Our agents they're on their laptops, they're running client service programs, they're incredibly sophisticated procedures that they're following and working with clients. So that for me is a really cool thing. And then also just this idea of service level, of having a way in which one can go into these kind of communities that are so used to being poorly treated because they're poor, are not valued, and actually trying to create a good service. I'm not saying that our service is always great, but that's our goal. And I think there's a real opportunity in that.
Brilliant. Damien, thanks so much. We really appreciate your time. There still are other questions in the chat, which I would love to have been able to put to you, but we are out of time. I'm hoping that you will be in the networking session later today from 2 to 3, because then hopefully those who are in this presentation can perhaps approach you directly to find out the answers to those questions. Damien, thanks very much. We really appreciate your time. An amazing presentation and really inspiring work, and yeah, good luck. Really looking forward to seeing the development in this space.
Thanks, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you, Damien. Thanks everyone. There'll be another session in about 15 minutes time. Please do join us.